Welcome to Group Text. You know my guest, Paul Scheer, from just about every TV and internet comedy ever made, as well as, let's be honest, we're going to get into this, a few bad movies. His words, not mine. His credit list is ridiculously long, so I'll just say you loved him on shows like Veep, 30 Rock, Fresh Off the Boat, Human Giant, Best Week Ever, and one of my personal favorites, The League. He also hosts the podcasts Unspooled and How Did This Get Made, which has been going strong for 14 years. We're going to get into that too. I could go on, but he's getting embarrassed, and I'm, well, honestly winded. Paul has written a wonderfully funny and honest new book called Joyful Recollections About Trauma, which comes out May 21st everywhere. Paul Scheer, welcome to Group Text.
I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, it's always so hard to follow an introduction like that. I feel like, though, we should all wake up to an introduction like that. We need, like, instead of an alarm clock, we just need someone to remind us of the things that we've done, because I think ultimately we wake up and we're like, I haven't done a thing. I am terrible. So it's good. This is a great way to start my morning.
See, and they do mine, I always hear like, well, I'm not the giant failure I thought I was.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It would be a better alarm clock, or maybe just an alarm clock that does affirmations. I think that would be a great way to wake up.
I would say yes to affirmations, but I hate self-help books for the most part, not all of them. And I can't do you're pretty, you're useful. People
I can't do that
like
stuff
you.
In the mirror. Yeah, no, I can't do that in the mirror. That's too much.
No, I'm always like, I'm a bitch. I look like crap. And I don't care if anybody likes me because I hate most people. It's my personal affirmation.
I always said that when I had my first kid, it's overwhelming. And my mantra for that was, dumber people have done it and poorer people have done it, so I can do it. Like, that was my way of getting through it. So that was whenever I was in my hardest moments, I thought on those two things.
And I can tell you from my point of view, or my son is 23, it's shocking to me how little I didn't fuck him up.
See, that's amazing. And congratulations. I mean, that's all we're trying to do. I mean, we're all just trying to get through without fucking up our kids. And we don't know, but I do think that we are in a generation where we are at least admitting our mistakes or being a little bit more real. I mean, I didn't have I've had more real conversations with my kids at age 9 and 7 than I think my parents have had.
Oh, absolutely. And so that's actually a great transition, because I want to talk about the book. I love the book. People should be aware, though, that this is not like a straight up comedy book.
No, it's not like just like a joke book, comedy book. I was very conscious of trying to do something that felt appropriate of being a book. We do podcasts, we have TV shows, we're talking all the time. And I was like, well, how can I elevate an anecdote into something that has a little bit more depth and a little bit more weight to it? And that's really how I tried to tackle the book. It is funny, and there are funny things in it, but it isn't just like, it's not like a bathroom reader. Although I like a bathroom reader.
It's raw.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, it was really, I don't know if I set out to be as raw as it became, but that's really how it just kind of became that.
I mean, seeing the funny, which you obviously did since a child in your own way, in surviving these horrible situations. I mean, brutal shit. Was that a coping mechanism for you? Because in my family, that was beyond our coping mechanism. So easy for me today. And that's something I totally understand, because the level of dark in our family's humor was startling. When my mom dropped me off at college and I was living in a house off campus, my dad had died in August. And this was now end of August, first week in September, going back to school. My mother walked into the house, stopped, looked at me and said, "Thank God your father's dead, rather than seeing you living like this."
Oh man, right? I mean, that's right. But don't you feel like those are the laughs and those moments that you can only have with, because people are so sensitive around a lot of things. And when you've been through death, when you've been through these dark moments, those laughs, those moments are the best moments in a way, right? Like, I think back on those the darkest moments are that release that you have with the person that you've been through it with. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it was a coping. I think humor's always a coping mechanism on some level, and you find out very quickly who you're dealing with by how dark you go and how they receive it, right? Like sometimes you'll make a joke that's really dark and people are like, and then you're like, oh, okay, I got it now. I can judge people by that, and I do judge people by that.
I agree, because in that moment, I remember, because it was so horrible, starting to laugh and then looking around and saying, "You're right." You know what I
Right, right,
mean?
right. It's like it is. It becomes this thing where you have to laugh. Like, I mean, you just have, like, what else are you going to do? I didn't grow up in a world where, and maybe this is different for you. Like crying was not something that was, like something that was embraced, right? So I guess humor is like a different level of crying. It is like
Yeah.
it's an emotional release, but just a different way of doing it.
And you talked, I mean, right off the bat, you tell us you had a very complicated and
Yeah,
traumatic childhood. I mean, you thwarted and survived a home invasion. You had
yeah.
an abusive stepfather. My favorite, though, by the way, is the obsessive collecting,
Oh yeah.
which had real hoarder potential. And I like to say my mom was a maximalist. And I don't know if you are now, which is rich people hoarding.
Well, look, I remember seeing the documentary about your mom. I think it was a piece of work, right, where every joke was cataloged in that big, like that to me. I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I love that. That was ideal. Like, I kind of I walk the line. My wife gets stuff out. I like to minimize, but I do keep stuff that has personal relevance to me. I'm not going to keep shit like bags and stuff like that. I just keep the stuff that means something.
What struck me, though, once I sort of put a little more perspective on the book, was as a child, you kept things that brought you joy and relief,
Yeah,
which I think
absolutely.
is fascinating, because you probably didn't even realize you were doing that in the counterbalance to this chaotic childhood. I mean, my family was competitive at Monopoly, but
Right.
no one jumped across the table threatening
Yeah.
to not pay rent by choking your child.
Well, look, this is the thing. You only know how messed up you are or how messed up things are once you get away from it. Like in the moment, you're living it. You don't know that much else about what's going on. And I think as I've gotten older, I've been able to look back and say these things. Like, you brought up this home invasion thing. Like, yeah, there was a person that tried to break into my house while I was home alone, and I had to fend off this person over the course of like an hour or two. And and I told that story just off the cuff one time to a friend. They're like, "Wait, what happened?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I guess I never really truly processed it." The same thing. It's like I had this abusive stepfather who it it was so commonplace, like what was going on. It wasn't until like years later that I started to be like, "Oh, that's not normal." But my life and my childhood felt normal, and I think that that's this weird balance, and sometimes it's like a life unexamined. So I think by being able to go back, I was able to start to look at things with a different perspective.
Yeah, everybody, people always say, would you have wished you had a different childhood, or that your family was different? I'm like,
Yeah,
I never really went to the neighbors, lived there for a
right,
couple weeks, saw the difference, came back and went, and I like it here. Like,
right.
it's normal to you.
I mean, that's really. I mean, I thought about you actually. Knowing that we were going to do this, I was like, what was it like for you to play yourself in going through the trauma that you went through? Because like that's really fascinating too. It's like it's not like someone took your story and then did it. Like you actually were able to. Was that helpful or therapeutic or cathartic to be able to like to play yourself going through this kind of trauma?
Let's just say it wasn't my choice.
Okay.
It is not something that I put on the top line of my resume, something I
Sure.
wish that would just go away. And I think it wasn't cathartic. I didn't learn anything other than it's really hard to not get the giggles kissing someone on screen.
Okay, I get it. I get that. I get
Yeah,
all of that. I
that
mean,
that was my great life lesson in that one. And then, maybe some of my mother's ideas were not fully thought through.
I get it. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, no, it's like, look, I think I got to a point where I don't think I could have written this book about me as a child until I actually had children. And that was something that was kind of surprising to me, because it wasn't until I had children and I understood like what being a parent was like, that I was able to like look back and have a different perspective on it. Because before that, you no responsibilities and whatever. And I think that not that I gave my parents more slack, but I didn't examine some of the choices as much as I did once I had kids and was able to decide, like, how do I want to do this and how do I want to do this differently?
I have found with my son, and again, I'm much further down the road than you, but that doesn't mean anything because it all can explode in my face. As someone once said about me, I think it was Bette Midler, someone was asking about why was she worried having a child in the business that they're all in? And she said, well, Melissa hasn't turned out to be a serial killer, so I think I'm going to be okay.
I'm like, well, look, that's all we want to do. We want to keep the people out of jail. I'm listening to this. Listen, all these murder podcasts, everyone's, it's like, look, if my kid is not the subject of a murder podcast, that's step one. Like, we've gotten out of the bottom tier of the gutter.
Yeah. And always you never want their smile to light up a room.
I like that. And I don't know why I'm agreeing with it, but I am fully agreeing with it. Is it because you don't want them to take too much attention?
No, nothing ever ends well when the story starts. Her smile lit up the room.
Oh,
everybody liked him. I'm like, no smiling, and don't be that nice.
I want my neighbors to be just a little suspect. I don't want them to be not that quiet. I want them to be a little bit loud and make some choices every now and then. So I can, so I won't, I think that means that they're not a serial killer.
Yeah.
They make a little bit of noise.
You always worry about when the dog carries something in their mouth, and you just got to make sure it's not a femur. That's just my thought.
Yeah, well, that's why you don't bury bodies in your own backyard. You got to drive a little bit for that. You got to go further out.
Yeah, people are just lazy. When you were doing the book, you do talk about that in the midst of all this domestic chaos, Hunter, your stepdad's kids were really kind to you.
Yeah.
And you formed relationships to the point where his daughter was even an alibi for you in the story you tell about perhaps an accidental fire. Just saying.
Yes, perhaps. I mean, look, at this point, I feel like the statute of limitations have passed. I did accidentally light a resort on fire as a child. And it was a mistake that I never admitted to. And I'm curious to see what my parents think about it when I finally have come clean. I come clean about setting a dude ranch on fire. By the way,
in hindsight, you were really miserable. So
yeah,
maybe it was a Freudian kind of mistake.
Yes. I mean, look, I had a very active imagination. I like to pretend that I was in movies. I didn't have a camera. I wasn't shooting these movies. I was just acting them out, which meant I was just running around, talking to myself. And my stepsister smoked, and I grabbed one of her cigarettes and was pretending to smoke. That's the best part of this, is that I wasn't even really smoking. I was just pretending to smoke. And that lit cigarette, when I tossed it away, I didn't understand you have to squash a butt. You can't just throw a lit cigarette into brush. And that really, I learned that lesson the hard way.
Yeah, you did. But, it's a good story now. Were there any topics when you were doing the book that really became off limits, that either cut too close to the bone for you or would unnecessarily hurt someone?
I think I was very cautious in writing this book. My parents are both alive, and I understood that part of writing this book, they have lives, they have friends, and I want to make sure that I was telling my story, not their story. I wanted to make sure that I protected them as much as I could, and then that I kept some stuff private. And that's not even about my childhood, but that's also about my relationship with my wife, June Rayfield, who you know from Grace and Frankie, and she also does a podcast, How Did This Get Made with Me? She, there are things that I will share, there are things that I won't share, and I think that it's that balance that you always find, because I think in this world where we live in, where it's, everything is Instagrammed, and you're doing lives, and you're in your own house, like there's a level where you can get maybe too personal. Like I like to keep a little bit of a wall up. So there are things that are uniquely our families and not for mass consumption.
How much are you keeping from about, I mean, again, age appropriate, from
Yeah.
your kids about your childhood?
You know, I try very hard to be honest with my kids. And I think it's always this balance of not going into too much detail, but also not lying to them, right? So so when we have talked about things in the past, I don't hide away from this part of my childhood, that I had this abusive stepfather, but I also don't get into all the details, right? So it's sort of like we can follow that up later, it. And because I always think with kids, like you never know exactly what they know, right? Because it's sort of like we're adults. We think about things maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead if we're lucky, and kids sometimes aren't thinking that same way. So I don't want to like overly stress them out or make them worried about something. It's like that thing where it's like my son's like, "Oh, I'm nervous about going on this flight to Europe." I'm like, "Oh, don't worry, we won't crash." And he's like, "Oh no, I was worried about being able to sleep." And you're like, "Oh, well, now I've just made it 10 times worse." Right. So it's like I always want to let them kind of lead the conversation so
Yeah.
I can remedy it as they go.
Yeah. It's interesting because how things slip out.
Yeah.
Cooper and I were having a conversation, and he brought up about somebody uh, processing, and I believe it is real, childhood trauma. And he was
Yeah.
giving someone a buy that didn't deserve a buy as an excuse.
Okay.
And I turned around to him and I said, "You want to talk childhood trauma? Try growing up in my house."
Yeah, of course. It's like, well, that's the thing too. It's like,
And I'm not discounting it being real, but it was
yeah.
just like that kind of an answer as a parent. Sometimes you, like you said, like, don't worry, we're not going to crash.
Yeah. Well, it's like that's the thing. It's like I think also, it's hard. It's like you walk this line, and I think, you know it probably more than I do, which is like you don't want to burden your kids with your own shit. And it's like, how do you, it's like, that's the balance I'm always trying to walk, which is like I want them to be, I still want to retain being a parent to them without them, but I also, it's like letting them in, but not letting them fully in, not letting them feel the weight of your own stress and your own anxieties. And look, I slip up, I make those mistakes. I feel that, it's like, but like, that's what I'm always trying to ride the balance of, is not bringing my stress to them. So they're like, "Oh no, dad's nervous or dad's stressed." I'm like, I don't want them to feel that.
You're not a Jewish mother. That answers that question. You also talk about in the book, which just, I want you to tell the story because it just
Sure.
made me giggle. You and your dad,
Yeah.
one of the trips you took was to Los Angeles. And at the time you could get the thing that told you where everybody was shooting.
Yes.
And you guys drove around LA trying to see stars, and you did. But there was one very particular meet.
Absolutely. Well, all right. So this is kind of this weird old Hollywood. When I was out here, there was a place called Hollywood on Location where you paid $75 and you could go wherever they were shooting something. It seems like really perfect material for a stalker, but it was like the 80s and we were much more open to it. So, you could just show up on sets, and we had the best time. We got to go to the set of Simon and Simon and Highway to Heaven. And, I met David Carradine. And the last one was for this movie called Communion. And I didn't know what that was. And we were waiting around and trying to see who we would see. And one of the security guards came over. And this has happened all day that we were going around Hollywood meeting people. Security guards were like, "Oh, do you want to meet this person?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it would be amazing." And they would bring us over. Now, by the way, I had an autograph pad. It's so funny because I think I have it right here. I had an autograph pad. My dad's a pharmacist. And so he would get like these, they're not prescription pads, but they were like pads that had like names of drugs on them.
Right.
So I have like Marky Post from Night Court signing a Vicodin pad, right? And but the security guards are always so nice to me. They're like, "Come closer, we'll introduce you to stars." And this one security guard comes over to me. He's like, "Hey, do you know Christopher Walken?" And I was like, "No." I was a kid. And my dad's like, "No, he was in the James Bond movie that you like, View to a Kill." I was like, "Oh yeah, I know him." He's like, "Do you want to meet him?" And I was like, "Yeah." And the security guard was, said, "All right, well, you can meet him, but you can't bring your parents and you can't bring a camera.
Okay, so now wait, I just want to pump the brakes for a sec.
Yes.
Could you imagine letting your child walk into a building without you, with someone wearing a windbreaker that says security?
No, I would never let that happen. I mean, it was like my dad looked at me and I looked at him and I was like, I want to do it. And he's like, okay. And I guess you're right. Like security guards, like they have some sway. Like, well, this guy's going to be there with me. So, security guard walks me across the street and then opens the door and like motions for me to step inside and then closes the door behind me. So the security guard's now not there. So now we're in this moment where I am alone in this vacant warehouse, in a dark warehouse, security guard outside, my dad across the street. What's going to happen? And then from out of the darkness, I mean, it truly was this crazy moment. Out of the darkness comes Christopher Walken. And, Christopher Walken shooting this movie Communion, where the premise of the movie is that he communes with aliens. And he looks freaky, like not like he is in full weird makeup. His eyes are like kind of bugged out. His hair is very, very slicked back. And he like approaches me, and I apologize for a terrible Christopher Walken I'm going to have to now do, but he's like, hello, little boy. Do you like movies? And I'm like, and I just think like I've never really met celebrities before this day. I thought these people were like Walt Disney World characters, and he's telling me about aliens. Like, we're making a movie about aliens. Do you believe in aliens? And I'm like shaking my head, yes, and then he gets down on my level, makes eye contact with me. He's like, don't let anyone tell you what you can, what cannot be. And then he pats me on the head, opens the door, and then sends me on my way. And I have this autograph on a Vicodin prescription pad of Christopher Walken. And that was it. And it was like the craziest moment of meeting Christopher Walken, not really understanding who he was, but that moment of all the stars that I met that day, was the most interesting because he really like spent a few minutes with me, gave me life advice, talked about aliens, and I think it burned in my mind. I mean, it was the perfect Christopher Walken experience.
It's so amazing. You had a different one with Alda.
Alda, not as nice. You see, I grew up as a kid who did not like MASH, but MASH was a show that my grandma loved MASH, and I was more Different Strokes, Benson, Silver Spoons, and my grandma's like, oh, there's Alda, go talk to Alda. And I was like, I don't really want to. She's like, oh, you want to be an actor? Go meet Alda. Now, my grandmother did have a tendency to do this, push me into people. Like even when we were going to church one time, Susan Lucci was on like line to get communion, like going up to the altar, and my grandma's like, go get her autograph. I'm like, it was an inappropriate time. So
did you do it?
I did not. I was. My grandfather was like, stay back. So so my grandmother kind of pushes me over to go talk to Alda. And I'm trying to be polite and I'm a little bit nervous. I'm waiting at the edge of his table until like there's a lull in the conversation. And again, I'm young, so I'm not like, I'm like 8 years old or something like that. And and all of a sudden Alda's friends are like, oh, Alan, I think you got a visitor over here. And he turns and I go, oh, Mr. Alda, can I have your autograph? And he goes, no. Just no, just like it was like, looked at me, no. And I was shocked because I was a kid. I was being brought in to meet Christopher Walken. I was meeting, Marky Post, Michael Landon. People were bringing me to celebrities. This guy just said no. And I start to walk away and he goes, hey, you know what? I'll give you an autograph if you can name 2 things that I was in. And I was like, totally flummoxed. I was like, MASH, and I had nothing. An 8-year-old shouldn't know about Alda.
No.
And
no.
and I was like, I don't know. And he was like, yeah, that's it. And I had to walk back. I was like shunned by Alda. Walk back to my grandma's table where she's with her friends, her bridge friends, who are laughing at me. They thought it was the funniest thing that Alda like shut me down. And I was like, you sent me over there. I didn't even want to meet this guy. I don't even like MASH. I mean, Alda definitely read me right. That I wasn't a fan. But I actually think when I think back to that moment, it was really just an FU to my grandma. I think he felt like that table was looking at him and he knew that I wasn't a fan and he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I don't know. I mean, because he seems by all accounts to be a lovely person.
He's a lovely guy. That's why I was like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, I think
What?
it could have been a myriad of things that went on, but it wasn't, and that was the thing. He wasn't like nasty to me. It was just sort of like, no, I'm not doing this. And maybe, people have things when they're eating. I don't know. I was a kid. All I know is I don't have an Alda autograph in my collection.
Well, maybe you'll get one. So you're part of Chicago City Limits, Upright Citizens Brigade,
Yeah.
some of the major improv groups.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you remember any of the people who were in your troops?
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, the people that I still perform with to this day are some of the people that I started out with. People like Rob Riggle, who was on The Daily Show, and Rob Corddry, also on The Daily Show. I'm thinking about Daniel Schneider, who hosts that podcast, Bitch Sesh or Garbage Sesh now. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Scott Armstrong, who wrote Old School. I taught Ben Schwartz. There's Zach Woods was in one of my classes that I taught. So
But you're not transitioning into the big one.
Oh, sorry.
Your
Wait, who?
wife.
Oh, my wife. Yes. Well, I thought look, look, I always think about who I started.
And then you're going on. I'm like,
sorry.
But you also met your wife.
Yes, I also met my wife there. So sorry. I should have picked up my cue back. I always think about like who I started off with. And it's kind of amazing. Like we started off with all these people that are super successful. Yes, but my wife, I met my wife at the Upright Citizens Brigade.
But yes,
she was doing, yeah.
I was going to say, no, I wanted to hear who you were with. And I'm like, and he's about to say his wife.
Nope.
And he's just like, no, the guy that wrote this.
Well, because I met my wife about 6 or 7 years into being at the UCB. Like we were there and we were like, so I had already been very entrenched in comedy in New York. And my wife was coming out of NYU with this amazing comedy show with Casey Wilson, who did Happy Endings and Marry Me and so many other shows. So we met, and that was really like, look, I came from a place, I don't know if you've had this too, but where I tried not to date people that I worked with, right? It's like, oh, you didn't want to because when you break up, it's awkward, then you can't really work with them again. But there was something about June when I met her, even though she kind of blew me off the first time we met, that I was like, oh, I may want to risk this. I may want to risk this rule that I have about like not, not dating people that I work with, because she was really interesting. And we both had come out of this big, long breakup. And I actually think we got together in a really good way because we kind of floated around each other for about a year. We got over our long-term breakups and then we're able to kind of find each other. And that was a great moment until it almost actually was totally sabotaged by our friends who were trying to protect us. And and as June and I were about to like kind of like really connect and be like, I think we're going to start dating, both of our friends told us that we only liked each other as friends, which was a real blow. And only months later did we find out that our friends accidentally almost sabotaged our entire relationship.
And it's 20 years now?
Yeah, we've been together. I think our 20th anniversary will be next year. Yeah, 2025.
That's crazy.
Yeah, really, really nuts. It's kind of amazing. We've been together and we've been through highs and lows and dark times and light times. And I think that's like the most important thing is like, I often think about June and go like, we've been through so much that sometimes, and we were talking about this in the beginning, like sometimes the darker moments that you can get through mean so much more than when it's easy and things feel great.
20 years in, can you guys comfortably say to each other, no, that's not funny, or I don't think this is working?
Yes, with the idea, we can be honest with each other about stuff like that, but we also have to be prepared for the immediate response of anger. Like there was a time where June was going to do a speech presenting an award for somebody in Las Vegas. And she's like, I want to read you the speech. And she read it to me. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. It's not funny. And she was like, I was like, but I wasn't even trying to be mean. I was like, yeah, that's good. Are you trying to be funny? It's not funny. And she was so mad at me. And I was like, I messed that up. And sometimes because sometimes you forget, like, this is my wife, this is my partner, this is a person Like, I think that she's one of the funniest people out there. Like, so I already know her baseline isn't like, oh, you're not funny. It's like, oh, that is not funny, but you are funny. My respect for her is always at an all-time high. Um, so I just said it very cavalierly, like, oh yeah, that's not funny. And she spiraled and then rewrote her speech and it killed. And she's often said, like, well, the reason why it works so well is because you gave me that very harsh feedback. And conversely, I'll put myself on tape for an audition or I'll do something. And June's like, no, that's bad. And I'll be like, what do you mean? I thought I was doing it. And then we'll work it through and we stick it out. And there's stuff that, that I do. Like, I mean, primarily me. June does not like a lot of the stuff I've done. She's like, oh, I don't like that. That's vulgar. I don't like so it's sometimes I can't show her everything that I do. So I'm okay with it though.
Well, at least you have a way to communicate. So you've been doing your podcast for, what do you say, 14 years?
14 years, yeah.
When you did In Bed with Joan, you had already had How Did That Get Made for 3 years. So I'm going to go on the assumption that you're making a fortune on them because you were so, what did you know that we didn't know? And does that upstart Joe Rogan give you a percentage? Because without you, there would not have been him.
You know what? No, I think that, honestly, I grew up loving Howard Stern. That was like my bread and butter. As a kid, I would listen to Howard Stern every car ride. I would get up early to listen to Howard Stern before school. And like any high schooler that's getting up early, like there's no reason for it. But I just love that camaraderie that happened on that show, the conversation between the people, like the characters of that show. And so when podcasting first started, it felt like to me a chance to do radio. I had done radio a little bit in New York. I just love that idea of like doing something that feels live or slightly disposable and fun. And I already did like improv, which was like disposable theater. So the idea of doing a podcast was really exciting. But then we were doing this podcast and saying to people like, oh yeah, it's a podcast. And people are like, well, what's that? Well, okay, so you have to go to the Apple store and you get and download an app called Podcast. That's like we were doing podcasts before the app was like on your phone for real, and
yeah,
so for me, it was sort of like, I think I've learned that chasing money always means that you're a little bit too late. Right? Chasing money means that somebody else has made money on it. So like sometimes if you just do something for free that people don't understand, it will work sometimes. Look, and I, whether it's streaming, whether it's trying to do something different, it's just thinking outside of the box because once it becomes the thing, then you're already too late. So I don't know if I knew anything. I just like doing it. And I tell people who do podcasts all the time, I'm like, the one thing you have to know about it is in success, you do more of them, right? There's no out. It's not like, hey, you do a great Broadway show, then you get in a movie and then you win an Academy Award. It's like you do a great podcast, you do more great podcasts. Maybe you get a better ad rate, more listeners. But, the truth is, everybody, you can come into this game today. You could be there for 14 years and you could be the biggest hit. I mean, Smartless, I think, just came out 3 years ago and they're the biggest thing in podcasting. So it's, it's to me, it's just sort of like, just have a passion of what you're doing and like what you're doing and just know it's never going to end.
So not Jewish, because our first thing, how much money do you make off it?
It's like, it's funny. It's like
I tuned out in the personal fulfillment part of your answer. Yeah. But you talk about terrible movies.
Yes.
Of which you talk about terrible movies, which there is no shortage, and I love. How do you determine if a movie is bad enough for an episode? I mean, what is the criteria it needs? What boxes does it check?
It's a tricky criteria because we don't want to just do bad movies that are not fun to watch. That's painful for everybody. We have an amazing producer. Her name is Avril Halley. And what she will do, and she's really helped us refine this idea, which is like, what is fun bad? What is the movie that you are talking to your friends during or right after you've seen it, you have to go out and process it, right? So it could be anything as like a big mainstream movie like 50 Shades of Grey. It could be a movie like Fast and Furious. Those are big ones, right? Then it could be something very small like Tommy Wiseau's The Room or this movie directed by a Orlando karate expert called Miami Connection. We kind of go all over the board, but there are so many movies that are just boring. Bad and boring. And so we always are trying to thread that needle. Like, for example, Lindsay Lohan's crypto Irish rom-com movie that just came out that people say is written by AI. It just came out on Netflix. It's like called like St. Patty's Wish or something like that. It's like a an Irish rom-com. That is not good enough for our show because it's just bland. It's just too bland. And but meanwhile, like a Vanessa Hudgens Princess Diaries, not bland, kind of crazy, kind of more fun. So it's like a very much you know it when you know it type of a thing. But if you had fun watching it and didn't want to stab out your eyes, that's when it's a good how did this get made movie.
God, we were just watching something where I said, if I have to listen to this person's voice for one more minute, I'm gonna like lose my mind. It was like something where like they were doing such a bad accent. And I was just like, I can't.
Was it me doing my Christopher Walken? No.
No, that would have been like I could have listened to that. This was like I was having
I know
those sort of angst moments because of that shit.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable to watch because you also know like the people who do the worst accents worked on it the longest.
Oh yeah.
Like, I almost have more respect for a movie where I watch people doing nothing. Like there's this whole movie we watched about Jamie Dornan and I think Emily Blunt about bees, and it's directed by John Patrick Shanley or written by John Patrick Shanley, and they're all doing these heavy Irish accents. And when the movie came out, all these papers in Ireland are like, what the fuck? This is not right. Like, it's like, and they're like, no, we trained with these people. It's like, well, you trained with the wrong people.
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, again, to bring it all full circle, Christopher Walken in that movie, no accent. Like, I love that. I love the boldness of like, yeah, no, I'm not doing an accent. I don't care.
Yeah. I'm me. I don't care. So
like let it go.
Okay. I'm going to be a total fangirl, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about two of my favorite shows.
Please.
The League.
Yeah.
And Veep. And both have amazing ensembles and are satirical on vastly different topics. You know, Veep is politics and The League is fantasy football.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is not funny in our house.
Fantasy football is a real thing that, look, how many people are in your league?
It's just a family league. So
okay, got it.
8.
That's perfect. That's a great league because you can still pick good players, and it actually makes it a little bit more challenging because every team is pretty good. I'm in a team of like 16, and like if you draft bad or one person gets injured, you're done. I like a team of 8 or like a group of 8. It like fantasy football, like that show, The League, was really fun because I think it captured something that, yes, if you played fantasy football, you would love that show. But also, it just captured a group hangout vibe. And I think that like the fantasy football was the reason that they hung out. But I feel like that's, one of the best parts of that show is like how we interact with our friends. We all have our one friend who's not married, our one friend who's divorced, our friends with married with kids. It's like, and finding that reason to hang out with them or how we hang out with them. And Jeff Schaefer and Jackie Marcus Schaefer, who created the show, they Jeff wrote on Seinfeld and Curb, and so he had that experience of creating like this improvised kind of outline. We would bring ourselves to the show. We had our characters, but then we could improvise within the scene. So that the entire show, while scripted, and I wrote episodes, there was no scripts. It was like these elaborate outlines that really allowed us, I think, to find stuff and really bring a lot of our own stuff into it. So I think that's why that show feels alive. And then similarly, on Veep, you have somebody like Dave Mandel. So Dave Mandel worked with Jeff Schaefer on Seinfeld and Curb, and he created this show, which I think was a lot more written, open to improv. But what he did, which I never saw anyone ever do, in Video Village. Video Village is where the director and the writer often sit to watch what's going on, right? They're watching, they come back onto set, they talk to the actors, they go back to Video Village. What Dave Mandel did was he actually created a writer's room in Video Village. So there are about 12 writers, not one or two, like 12 writers who were there watching the scenes and just looking at it and going, how can we make this better? What can we do? So you would get scenes. I would get my scenes for the day that I was shooting at 3 a.m, or I get fresh ones on set. The scripts were always changing. They were always very much alive. And it was this idea of like, every idea was just getting topped and topped and topped. So you were, maybe you'd start a scene doing one script, and by the time you finished coverage, you were on a different script. And it was amazing to work with those people because everyone there it wasn't like a group of people like, oh no, I need to learn my lines. It was like, we're going to go with the flow. It had the energy of improv with the genius of the great writing.
And both those shows are such amazing ensembles. And you came into Veep later as a character that I can relate to.
Yes, the producer. Yeah,
I mean, that morning news producer.
Yes. I always said to Dave, I was like, that should have been the spinoff of Veep, like just to do a CBS morning news show, because I feel like that we have the morning show, and the morning show is serious drama. You know, I like the comedy version of trying to keep that like the Veep energy. You know, because we've seen like the multicam version. I wanted to see like that harder edged energy there for that. I always thought that could be a great show.
That, or I always said a talk show, a straight daytime talk show.
Yes, like you want like a Kelly Clarkson, syndicated. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Or old Oprah, where you vacillated from celebrity to,
oh my gosh,
why did he break up with me?
Yes, those episodes. I mean, I remember growing up on Donahue. I would watch Donahue all the time, and it'd be like, here, this guy's from the Ku Klux Klan, and the next day it was like, his new movie is coming out. Yeah. And then it was everything. You could never get ahead of it, what was happening on that show.
Which is now very much like morning TV.
Yes.
The book, Joyful Recollections About Trauma, out May 21st. Podcast, How Did That Get Made and Unspooled? Paul Scheer.
All of these. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure. I'm such a fan of yours. I'm thrilled to be on this show. So thank you so much.
And I need to come on and talk about bad movies.
I would love to do that. I would love to do it. We do like live shows. I'll let you know. That'd be great.